Ooh, a spicy question. I
because
love
the writing is sort of everything, right? Like you kind of can fix plot holes, but if the writing isn't
So some
there,
readers love that, and some readers are like, but I wanted more of this. So it's kind of a gamble.
Hello and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. Joining me on this episode is an award-winning book marketer, a TikTok content creator, and a fellow podcaster. And as of very recently, has just released her debut novel. It's Eleanor Pilcher. Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for coming on and chatting with me. A lot to talk about.
Yep.
But always like to start these with the latest works, and that, of course, is your debut novel, which will be out by the time this airs. It's called That's What She Said. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, it's a bit what's the word I'm looking for here? Risque, perhaps. So pre-warning to anyone listening in. But yeah, it's the story of two women in their late 20s. They're best friends and roommates. We have Beth, who is a demisexual young woman who's slightly down on her luck in her career and absolutely adores her best friend, but is kind of looking ahead to the future. And then we've got Serena, who is a very confident bisexual young woman who basically is afraid of relationships and emotional intimacy. And it's the story of these two friends as they come together. Beth is feeling a bit uncomfortable about her demisexual status. She's been made to feel a bit uncomfortable for being a virgin. And she's interested in kind of discovering more about herself and her sexuality and what it means for her life going forwards. You know, will she be able to date? Will she be able to marry? What does it actually mean? What does her body want? And her best friend, Serena, who is super confident in bed, says, well, let me help you with this. And they go on a sexual odyssey. And it's a comedic drama. Things go awry and there's a lot of miscommunications, a few popular tropes in there. And we will see where it ends up. Well, you will if you read it. But yeah.
Yes. On the front, it says a platonic comedy of errors. And I think that sort of sums up what you were just describing there.
Very much so, yes. It is a lot of things happen, a lot of things that were inspired by real life, some of which were not inspired by real life, but
yes,
a lot of comedy.
Yeah. So I'm familiar with bisexual, but forgive me, what is demisexual?
So demisexuality is under the spectrum of asexuality. Asexuality is basically when a person doesn't have or has very limited sexual attraction to another person. So there's lots of different kind of sexualities within this. You have asexual, which is no sexual feelings for anybody at any time. Then you have demisexual, which is Beth's character, who has, for the most part, doesn't have sexual attraction, sexual feelings even for anybody, unless she has a very, very deep emotional connection, which is a bit more than just your average dating. You need to really, in her case, it's all about trust, but it's different for everybody. It's not a universal experience. It can change, but you have to have an emotional connection with someone before you are sexually attracted to them. And then there's a few others like grey sexual, for example, where sexual attraction can be fleeting, comes and goes at random. But that's the kind of, it's under, like I said, the asexual spectrum.
Oh, okay. This is new to me, so I'm learning a lot here. But that's what what makes sort of books like this so interesting is you're kind of exploring something that isn't as broadly, you know, I think most people will know what bisexual means, but you're now talking about things which is like a whole new area, which is like really one of the best things about reading a novel is kind of learning about new parts of society that you didn't understand or know existed in some cases.
Yeah, exactly. I think that was the main driver, I'd say, actually, for why I wanted to write this, because I am a demisexual woman myself. And I didn't realize I was demisexual until I read a book, which was Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. And that kind of just sort of ticked a box in my head and went, oh, that's me. And I was 25 when that happened. You know, it wasn't in my teen years. I wasn't 18 years old. And so it's a lot of people, like my publisher and I, we had a discussion about, do we call this, That's What She Said, do we call it a book about coming of age? Because the characters are in their late 20s. But I kind of thought, well, yeah, because sexuality, particularly with regards to asexuality, which there isn't much literature about at the minute, is more. I'm very glad there's more, but there's been very limited amounts of books and stories, and certainly in film and TV until recent years. And so it is a coming of age novel, and it is about discovering more about demisexuality and asexuality as a whole. But it's new to most people. And I really like the response I've been getting from people saying, oh, I have never read about this, I've never heard about it, or this is me, or even just people that know they're demisexual, asexual, reading it and going, this really helped me to feel seen. So that's my favorite kind of comment or review. It doesn't even matter if they like the book or not. If they just feel seen because of it and the representation, that makes me very happy.
Yeah, amazing. And it sounds like it sounds like it was a lot of fun to write, and it's a lot of fun to read as well. You've been, I mentioned it as I was introducing you, but you've been working in publishing for over a decade. So I was wondering, is this the first novel that you have written, or have you been writing your own stories, the whole time that you've been working in publishing?
Yeah, I think like pretty much everyone that must come on your podcast, I've been writing since my teenage years. I wrote my first novel when I was 16, which will never see the light of day, ever. And then I just continued writing. I went to university to do history and acting, actually. And then when I got to my university, it had a very strange system. And they said, oh, you need to take another course. So I took creative writing, and ultimately I got a degree in history and creative writing. Which are connected, because history, acting and creative writing is all about storytelling. So I realized in creative writing classes, oh, I like stories. Stories are my kind of bread and butter. And it wasn't really until I was at university that I realized that the writing I was doing, the novels I was writing as a hobby, rather than going to the shops or whatever with my friends, could actually lead to a career. So from then on, I think, so from about the age of 19, 20, I started dedicating myself, trying to get better. I started applying. I started sending submissions to literary agents, and I got a few kind of calls for manuscripts and feedback and such, but I didn't really hear anything about a deal or an offer actually until 2019. And that came about really randomly, because by that point I'd been working in publishing for 3 years, full time. And I've met an agent who was new to her job at the time at an industry party. And I'd submitted some work for the Simon & Schuster One Day submission, which I think actually one of your guests, Heidi Swain, did the same thing. And
yes.
She's lovely. And I submitted it to that, and I had some interest from S&S. And my then colleagues at HarperCollins said to me, oh, you should use this and get an agent. Because at the time I was just going it alone. I'd given up on the agents. I'd been submitting for 5-6 years at that point. But I reached out to this agent that I'd met at a party a few weeks beforehand and said, look, this has happened. S&S are interested in something. Would you be interested in reading it? And I sent that email from my office at 9 a.m. And by 3 p.m. that day, I had representation. I had an email offer. She didn't even read the manuscript. She was like, yeah, this sounds good to me. Let's go for it. Sadly, nothing came with the S&S. The editor that was interested left. I've actually since worked with her on the freelance basis, but not as an editor for a project itself. And then, to be honest, we then went into lockdown. And a lot of things happened in lockdown. And actually one of them was writing. That's what she said. I wrote it in between March and August of that year. Just every weekend I just spent writing because there was nothing to do. You couldn't go outside. So yeah, it was an eventful few weeks.
Was it, because I know that publishing is one of those industries that is massive, but it can feel small because to some degree it sometimes feels like everyone knows each other. Yeah. Was it strange having, your professional life in publishing for many years, and obviously you would have a lot of connections within that? Was it strange sort of looping around and coming back into it from this different direction?
It wasn't at first, but then to be honest, when I first kind of got an agent and started submitting and doing things like that, I'd probably been in the industry about 5 years and I was still fairly junior. And because of the pandemic, I hadn't really been, well, to be honest, I was also an introvert. I was an introvert and the pandemic, and I hadn't really been socializing and going to parties and networking too much. I'd gone to the industry ones where I was required to be there. It was a case of slightly being forced to turn up and have warm Prosecco. But then after the pandemic, there was a sudden need to speak to people. And so now I think my network and my relationships have changed. And I do think I feel it slightly more, definitely as a freelancer as well, where I'm talking to somebody new practically every hour, it feels like. So you feel it a bit more after a decade, you certainly feel it a bit more, but it's also that there's the cycle of people. I mentioned the editor at S&S who then left, who I've now worked with, and then my agent at the time who has since left, and I've got a new agent, and there's so many people coming back around and re-entering my life at different points. So it's interesting to see the development. And
in publishing, people are moving all the time as well. Like I work with a lot of publicists for the podcast, and I've worked with publicists who have now been at 3 different publishing houses in the time that I've been doing this podcast.
Yeah. I mean, how long have you been doing this podcast now? I'll tell you how many I've been at.
Like 3 years.
3 years.
No,
Okay.
I'd
I've been at 3. Yeah.
Yeah,
I've done
there you
that.
go. See?
Exactly that. So it's we do move around sometimes, not by choice. I mean, I was made redundant last year, so I have since gone freelance. But in the space of my writing career, just to give you an example, I actually did an IP book first. So that's what she said I consider my debut, because it's my first novel written under my full name, and it's my idea and my story, my submission, everything. But I was actually asked to write a book on behalf of an imprint, which has since closed down. So that imprint was only around for about 18 months before it got shut. It was a very, very quick blink and you miss it kind of moment in publishing history. But in the time of even this book with That's What She Said, I submitted it to my editor, because I'm published by Harper US technically. So I'm published primarily in the USA and then distributing it in the UK via Harper 360, which is the sort of UK base for US titles. So it's all complicated because I'm a UK author based in the UK, published by the US. But my editor in the US, she acquired it in November of 2023. And then by January 2024, I had a new editor because she left.
Wow.
So it's very quick to change. And even with the IP book, which came out in 2021, I had, I think, 2 different marketers, maybe, and multiple publicists. So the staffing can change on a dime, it feels like, at any moment. I've had 2 agents. It's kind of, it never stays the same. And I mean, as a marketer myself, I've worked on books. Some books I've worked on a series of kind of 4 or 5 for an author, and then other books I work on one book for that author, and by the time they deliver their second book, I've left. So it can be really, really quick. I think gone are the days where an author would have the same editor and the same like marketing team. Like it's rarer now than it was like 10, 20 years ago, I'd imagine. Much rarer. I'd say even, to be honest, 5 years ago. I think the pandemic really did cause a lot of changes in the way that the publishing industry works, not only with kind of working from home, but also where people want to live and how centralized it is to London. So there's just a lot of natural movement. And then also with the likes of sales being what they are, restructures, redundancies are quite common. So a lot of changes can happen very quickly, as I mentioned, but also slightly out of the publisher's control. So hopefully it will stabilize soon, though.
Well,
fingers crossed.
We'll see. The US aren't helping right now. And your current agent is the wonderful Hannah Schofield at LBA. She's been on twice before on this podcast.
She's brilliant.
How did that partnership come about then?
So, I had another agent, like I mentioned, also called Hannah, so not at all confusing. And she was leaving her agency. She was going to work in-house at a publisher, so she was leaving agenting as well. And when she left, the agency that I was with didn't have any literary agents at all. They had kind of moved away from the literary space and were more into a different talent management area. And whilst I was absolutely represented by the agency, I was a bit concerned that whoever came in, I wouldn't necessarily have control over in terms of, do they like my style? Do they like my writing? I also didn't know when they were going to come in, when they were going to join the company. And at the time I'd been published, but I hadn't actually gone on submission for nearly 2 years, and I'd written 2 novels. So I was a bit impatient. So I decided to submit under a pseudonym, because I'm always aware that I work in publishing and therefore I work with a lot of agents. And I didn't want to kind of go down the nepotistic route again, because I did kind of the first time. So I decided to submit to a few hand-selected agents who I kind of knew the style of under a pseudonym and see what happened. And I messaged Hannah Schofield as one of them, and I sent her a novel, which is a Christmas romance. And it was all under a pseudonym, a very Christmassy name. And she came back fairly quickly and kind of said very politely, this is nice, I like it, but I have another author that's writing something similar at the minute, so I can't take this on. Good luck for the future. And I kind of very quickly went, you know what, I've got this other novel, which is slightly risque, slightly risky. Do I want to publish it? I'm not sure, but I'm going to give it a go. And I sent it to her and I said, look, I've got this friend story. It's a sexual odyssey story, demisexual representation. And again, within 5 hours, I got an all caps email, which was just send me this manuscript now. And then a couple of weeks later, I was at an industry party again, and she was there. She had no idea who I was. We'd never actually met in person before. And we did the kind of introductions and such, and she was very, very nice. And the next day I got an email from her saying, I really like this manuscript. I want to know who you are now, because I still hadn't revealed at this point my name. And I kind of went, well, we met yesterday, which was really, really funny. And it turned out she'd actually been speaking to one of the editors at my publisher about this manuscript she was reading that she was really liking. And it turned out to be mine. So, which was really, really nice. And then that was it. We met up because she worked around the corner from me, met up for a coffee. And she had to be a bit blunt. She was like, you do realize I'm offering you like representation, right? Because I was just sat there having a good old chat. So I was like, oh yeah, that would be great. Please. Thank you. And then, of course, there's a bit of, I was, like I said, still represented at that point by my old agency. So we went through all the T's and C's. It's very, if you're not happy with your agency, or if you're ready to move on, or it's not working for you anymore, which happens quite a lot, actually, surprisingly so, perhaps. You just kind of have to make sure you've just followed the T's and C's. And that was it. So 30-day cooling off period, couldn't talk to another agent, couldn't do any deals or edits or anything like that. And as soon as that was done and they no longer had any rights to me, it was a case of signing up with Hannah. And then here we are.
Because you were still, even though your agent had left, you were still
represented by the agency. Yeah. So it's it's like I said, it does happen. It's just a case of an agent leaves or an agency changes. So like I said, it was a literary agency when I started working with them. And then a couple of years later, it was more of a talent management agency. So we just weren't as aligned as we used to be. So it just seemed like the natural time to move over, because I knew more about my style of writing and what I wanted to do at this point. So an LBA and Hannah were really perfect for me, and I've really loved working with them as well. So that's kind of just how I went about. But all contracts will have a kind of break clause or what to do. It's a bit like a very polite breakup, but
yes,
still amicable, still friendly.
Yeah, and it sounds like, given that agency had sort of become something else, I'm sure there was no pushback from their end. No,
they were absolutely fine with it. And it was maybe people kind of say, are you okay to submit to others while you are still technically represented? And the answer is yes, so long as you do it and you're upfront about it. So even though I'd submitted under a pseudonym, I did always put in my emails, I am currently represented. However, not on submission, not currently in contract. There was no kind of messy bits to sort out. I hadn't had a book published in over 2 years. Like I said, hadn't been on submission at all. So there was nothing really to kind of stick around for. Had I been in contract, had I had a book on submission, then absolutely that would have been a bit messy and I would have stuck with the agency. But as I said, it was kind of a natural time for me to move on.
Okay, yeah. That's interesting, like something to highlight for anyone listening who maybe has an agent or is thinking about moving agents, just to make sure that they understand, like you say, the T's and C's, what you kind of need to do to transition between one agency to the other.
Yeah, precisely. And I did have a very open conversation with the head of the agency beforehand, just to kind of see what was happening with the literary agency side. When was the new agent going to join? And there wasn't really much of an answer. She didn't have one at the time, which was completely fair. But it was also very clear to me that it wasn't the right fit for me anymore. And there was no ill will in that case. I think they recognised it too. So that was why. So very smooth, actually. Surprisingly smooth, but very smooth.
Okay, yeah, as good as you could hope for, I guess.
Exactly.
In that kind of situation. Let's talk about. I'd love to talk about a few of the other things that you're going on, because you are someone that is juggling or spinning many plates, to mix my metaphors together. TikTok. You are a content creator on TikTok, and you're getting many thousands of views over there. When did you start doing the sort of TikTok stuff?
I started playing with it during the pandemic, and I say playing with it because I was sort of sampling it on behalf of my then team, because I was the only marketer on the team. Everyone was talking about TikTok. No one knew what it was in 2020, 2021. So I set up my own account just to sort of, like, say, play around, see what the lip syncs were like and how to do dances and how to use the platform. And then in 2023, I kind of thought I'd do an experiment where I just posted every single day for a month and see what the impact was. Because I think by that point, after about 3 years, I'd grown to about 3,000 followers, but I was posting maybe 4 or 5 times a month, that very sporadically, usually not even in front of the camera. And then I did this experiment. And I think on day 3 of posting every single day, I just had a video go massively viral, completely out of the blue, just recommending short classic books. And then that was it. I just continued the experiment, posting every day, and the videos just kept performing. And then I realized I actually quite liked this, and I liked being able to talk to people about books and not kind of do dances and lip syncs. I realized what my passions were. And yeah, I just started to focus on it. I thought, well, I'll just carry on for another month. And then it just spiraled. So I mean, there's been a few days where I haven't posted now because of illness or holiday or Wi-Fi issues or whatever it may be. But for the most part, I've posted every day or every other day now for over a year, and grown my followers to over 20,000 and learnt a lot of lessons, earned some money from it. It's kind of, it's just become part of my career now. And I'm very grateful to myself. And that sounds very narcissistic, but I'm glad that I did it when I did it, because then, like I said, 6 months later, I got made redundant. So it was a case of, now you have something to fall back on.
Yeah, exactly. Whilst we're on TikTok, a lot of authors that I've spoken to, and especially debut authors, because I think when you're first coming into this, there's a lot of pressure you feel a lot of pressure to sort of be like, I need to put myself out there. And a lot of people ask, something like TikTok, which is, I mean, Book Talk has such a profound impact on the way that the industry is kind of working and how things are marketed now. People are always asking, how do I make TikTok work for me? What advice would you give to authors who are trying to sort of build a presence on TikTok?
Yeah, I'm not going to lie, it's huge. And it is having a huge impact on the publishing industry when it comes to things like acquisitions and what we look for when we look for authors. It's not to say you have to have a TikTok or that you have to have a massive TikTok if you do have one. But if you are thinking about doing it, I think the first thing to always consider is this where my audience is? Is TikTok where the readers of crime fiction are? And at the minute, I'd say no. But if you're writing a fantasy, a romance, a romantasy, to combine the two of them, then probably that is where your audience is. And it's more likely that you should set up a TikTok and give it a go. So I think that's the first thing, is my audience there. The second thing is, with authors in particular, I always say to them, what's your niche? Because if I say what's my niche as an author on TikTok, it's not actually being an author or talking about demisexuality or even my book for the most part. It's primarily talking about classic books, which has no connection whatsoever to my genre, at least, but it still connects me to readers, and I love that. And they seem to connect with me as a content creator in that way. So I'd say that's kind of my niche, but it doesn't always have to be related to your actual book or even books in general. I've seen authors that have niches where their niche is kind of painting or embroidery or knitting, something artsy and craftsy. I've seen others that are, I mean, I'm thinking of my old editor, B. Fitzgerald, is on there, also an author, and absolutely brilliant. And her niche on TikTok is actually Greek mythology. And she does these amazing little comedy sketches using trending sounds, and whilst dressed up as Hera and Zeus, and they're absolutely fantastic, very entertaining. And that's her niche. So I think that's kind of you need to figure out what it is, and experimenting. I mean, like I said, I started TikTok probably 2021, and it took me 2 years to figure out that classic books and book recommendations as a whole was where I sat, because I was doing all the trending sounds, the TikToks, the lip syncs even, and the sort of talking to camera carousels. I was experimenting, and you don't need to get it right initially. I think a lot of authors put a lot of pressure on themselves to hit the ground running, have a load of content, post every single day, build up their following immediately. You don't need to. You just need to kind of figure out, do you like the platform? What works on the platform for me and for my potential audience, and go from there. But there's a lot of experimenting to be done, and it is quite high pressured, and it feels like it could be a flash in the pan moment. I mean, it's stuck around for the last 5 years. I don't think it's going anywhere yet. But it is something I as a freelancer in particular, I do have a lot of conversations with authors, both independently published and traditionally published, about TikTok and whether or not it is the right place for them. But if I'm being absolutely honest, TikTok at the minute is where I'd say a large portion of organic marketing and publicity is succeeding. So yes, it is a good place to be if you work at it. But if you don't enjoy it, then readers and viewers can absolutely tell that. And it's not worth doing, in my opinion, if you don't enjoy it. So,
okay. Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty solid overview and some good advice there for anyone listening. Then the other thing, speaking of additional revenue streams, you have a Substack with many paid subscribers. You were telling me this before we started recording, but you used to run a blog and a mailing list, and you've kind of transitioned it into Substack. Is that right?
Yeah, that's very much it. I got my first jobs in publishing actually because I used to run a blog, because back in the day, a decade ago now, because that makes me feel old, having a WordPress site and being able to do basic coding and know how to use Canva were really kind of desirable skills for marketers. They still are to a degree, but now it would be TikTok related rather than Canva and coding perhaps. But I did have a blog. I loved it. I didn't see much in the return with regards to revenue. I saw nothing. But with regards to kind of traffic and such, it was fine. It didn't lead to anything. I didn't get opportunities. I just enjoyed doing it. And then when I left my last role and I went freelance, I had a mailing list, and I got to the point on my mailing list where I was going to have to pay to send newsletters to my subscribers. And I just thought, well, that's an absolute pain. I don't really need that added expense, but I also need to grow my mailing list. I need to grow my business, my audience. I've got a book coming out. And so I looked into Substack at that point because I thought this is the best of both worlds. I can stop paying the domain on my blog. I can stop paying to reach my readers and actually just put it all into one place and make it look pretty and make it serviceable both as a book content creator, but also as a freelance marketer and as a writer. And then, like I said, I've been running it now for about 9 months. I have earned more money from my Substack than I earned in the 8 years I was writing a blog, and definitely earned more than I've ever earned from my newsletter in terms of sales as well, and direct clicks and things like that. So it's proven to be a really good platform for me. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the right platform for everybody. We were discussing Patreon, for example. There are a lot of different ones that people enjoy, but yeah, it's worked really, really well so far for me.
I would say, I mean, especially if the majority of your content you're going to do just written word and like articles and blogs, like you say, Substack, I think, probably is the best choice for that, because that is what it primarily does.
Yeah, definitely. And it kind of comes with its own social media. It's sort of like a Twitter replacement for me, because they have something called Substack Notes, where you can engage with other content creators, but also just people that read other Substacks on there, which has proven very engaging and actually enjoyable as well. It kind of feels like the good old days of Twitter, back when people used to have communities and Q&As. And I don't know if people remember the old sort of weekly chats that were always at like Tuesday at 8 p.m. We all get on Twitter and answer questions for an hour. I miss that. So that's a quite enjoyable side of it. But there's a lot of other pluses to the platform that I know a lot of other content creators on there love, like their podcasts and things. But the monetization, you don't have to monetize it, and it doesn't have to be every post. I think most of mine are free for the most part, but there's an element of me, particularly from the freelance side, where I'm giving kind of tips and tricks to authors and publishers and opinion pieces, whatever it may be, that I charge for as a freelancer now in coaching calls or in packages. So being able to put that behind a paywall, even if it's only £3.50, is still beneficial to me as a secondary income as a freelancer. So I've really enjoyed doing that. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I recently had Eleanor Pilcher on, who's had great success with sort of indie publishing her novels through Substack. And I think I've spoken to a couple of authors who are either beginning that kind of process or thinking about doing that kind of thing. Do you see it as somewhere, a new kind of avenue that some parts of the industry are headed towards?
I think so. I mean, I've definitely seen a lot of authors gravitating over to it because of the fact it's free to use, which a lot of the newsletters, like I say, just aren't after a certain amount of subscribers subscribe. But it's also, you can set up Substack newsletters for a specific project. So if you're just releasing a book, for example, you can create multiple Substacks for different books or different projects. Some authors I've worked with have created Substacks just to promote a book, like they release extra content, deleted scenes, their findings, their playlist, whatever it may be, through it. But I've also started to see a lot more publishing professionals going on there and giving advice, doing roundups, bringing people behind the scenes of what it means to work or be published in the publishing industry. The only thing I haven't seen yet, but I'm sure we will see soon, is the kind of corporate side. I haven't seen any of the indie or big five publishers yet join Substack and use it as a newsletter format. But I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year we see some of them move in there, because the monetization element of it is great, but you can also directly talk to your subscribers. You can have a conversation in the comments and DMs with the people that subscribe, which you just can't really do with a newsletter. You land in their inbox and you hope they read it and you hope they click on things. But on Substack, you can have an absolutely open dialogue. And I think that's a really interesting thing. And I wouldn't be, like I said, surprised to see a publisher experiment with it, a bit like TikTok.
Yeah. And there's something different about engaging with like someone who is following you freely versus someone who is paying to subscribe to you. You know, that's a much more invested user in some ways. So their feedback might be more interesting than the sort of lots of free users.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it can be a real mix. I mean, majority of my subscribers, I say, are still free, and that's perfectly fine. That's kind of what I want as well. A lot of the stuff I write is tailored towards people in entry level or just starting out. And I don't want them to have to pay for very simple or very, should be easy to access advice. But the stuff, like I said, I put behind the paywall is usually things I charge for, but then the people that pay get access to that and they can have more one-to-ones and work with me, or I can work with them in whatever way they need. So it's interesting. And I think publishing has never really missed a trick when it comes to, they might be a bit delayed, but they never seem to miss a trick when it comes to new programs and platforms. So yeah, I think we'll see something by the end of the year. And I almost hope we do, because I'd really like to see how it would work. Yeah,
it'll be interesting for sure. Just before we head over to the desert island, you have recently started a podcast. It's called Why You're Reading, and you do it with YouTuber Literacy. Just quickly tell us a bit about the podcast, what it is, and kind of why you guys started it.
Yeah, absolutely. This was one of the really interesting opportunities that came my way after I went freelance, where a very lovely producer who used to work at the BBC just dropped in my emails and went, "Can I call you about this podcast idea I've had?" And it just spiraled from there. I ended up going to his house in Covent Garden and, not Covent Garden, even Camden, and thinking I was about to be murdered. I wasn't, but he did say when he opened the door, "I'm not a murderer." I was like, "You would say that though, wouldn't you?" But then
that's more suspicious.
Exactly, it was more suspicious. I love Jeremy; he's great. But I hadn't actually met my co-host, Ellen, at this point. We met for the first time at his house and we discussed this idea. We were both recruited, but we got on instantly and we had such an easy rapport. And it was funny because we'd be chatting and he'd be recording us and he'd just stop and just go, "Yeah, this will work." This is like, okay. But we had a lot of discussions. We have an audio editor who thankfully does all the tech side, usually at Sunday night at the very end of the day. So really, really big shout out to Eleanor. But yeah, we had this chat, we planned it all out and we wanted to focus on sort of the big book talk books. So the books that everyone's talking about, both the backlist, so books that were published more than a year ago, in some cases more than 10 years ago. And then also the books that have just published, like Sunrise and the Reaping. And be able to kind of jump on the chat of like, why is this so popular? Why are we reading books about domestic abuse and talking about them like they're the best thing ever? Why are we reading books about habit making and do they actually work? And it's just proven to be really interesting and really exciting. And I love being able to chat about publishing, as you may be able to tell. So being able to kind of bring that side of it whilst Ellen brings all her cultural knowledge. She's very, very intelligent. It's proven to be just very interesting and enjoyable. And I've read so much as a result. So I feel on trend for once.
Awesome. Well, it sounds great. Anyone listening, if you want to check that out, it's called Why You're Reading and it's on Apple, Spotify. I imagine other places too, but those are usually the two places people go.
Yeah,
and YouTube. Bunch. Yes. Awesome. So we are at the point where I ship you off and ask you, Eleanor, if you were stranded on a desert island with a single book, which book do you hope that it would be?
Ooh. There's a load that come to mind immediately. But to be honest, my favourite book and one that I probably reread at least once a year is actually a book called The Reader by Bernhard Schlink, which is a German translation historical novel set primarily in the years after World War II in Germany, as I mentioned. And it's interesting because it covers three sort of periods in a man's life: when he's a teenager, when he's a student, and then later when he's a middle-aged man, divorced and kind of going through some things. And it's all about this relationship he has with a much older woman when he was a teenager. And then I don't want to give any spoilers away, and it'd be very easy to give some spoilers away, but there's a lot of references to what occurred in Germany in World War II, the woman's part in it, and his relationship with her, and his sort of the damage that was done, but also the other emotions that kind of came into play with the romance they had when he was, like I said, underage, and also when he rediscovers her later on in life. So it's very complicated, morals and ethics story, very interesting, very simply written, but incredibly, incredibly moving. And there was a fantastic film adaptation as well with Kate Winslet. I think it's the one she won the Oscar for as well. But yeah, that's the one I'd want to probably take with me. I just find it, whenever I read it, I get something different from it. My perspective changes and the characters change in my head every time. I find it very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like it covers a lot of emotional range.
It does.
Within the story.
Definitely.
And also combining the two parts of your degree, history and creative writing.
Precisely that.
Perfect. Next up, we are going to get into a bit more publishing stuff. Quite specifically, I wanted to pick Eleanor's brain about her experiences in marketing and publicity for novels. All that will be in the extended episode available at patreon.com/rightandwrong.
Maybe Facebook, if you're writing poetry, seems to work really well on Facebook at the minute. So you have to kind of experiment, see where your favorite authors are, see where they're based and where they're posting, and see what you enjoy.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's some great advice there. And that brings us quite nicely to the end of the episode. So thank you so much, Eleanor, for coming on the podcast and chatting with me, telling us all about your debut novel, That's What She Said, which is out. It'll be out right now as of this going live. It's got a lovely, colourful cover. So I imagine it'll be very easy to find in a bookshop, and it's out in all the usual places. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and chatting with us. It's been great.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And for anyone wanting to keep up with what Eleanor is doing, you can find her on Instagram at Eleanor Pilcher, author, on TikTok and Substack at Eleanor Pilcher, or on her website. If you just Google her, she comes up. All the things are there. To support this podcast, like, follow and subscribe. Join the Patreon for ad-free extended episodes, and check out my other podcasts, The Chosen Ones and Other Tropes. Thanks again to Ellie, and thanks to everyone listening. We will catch you on the next episode.